This video contains some spoilers for the following games and books. The details of what exactly I'm spoiling will be in the description below, so if you want to avoid that, this may not be the video for you. But if you're happy to proceed, let's begin.
What's the scariest thing that could ever happen to you? It's something that I imagine most people try to think about as little as they possibly can. Now, for some, it might be being buried alive and slowly suffocating knowing that you either can't escape or even move. Or maybe you're more like me and share my thalassophobia or fear of the ocean, and your worst nightmare is being stuck out in the open water with nothing else in sight in all directions and no view of what's below you. No matter what the specifics of it are, for most people, the scariest thing that could ever happen to them normally involves death. Nyctophobia, the fear of the dark, only exists because we want to see what's around us so that we know we're safe. Acrophobia, the fear of heights, is really the fear of the fall and the grisly end at the bottom. There's countless others, but almost all primal, heart-stopping fears go back to thanatophobia, the fear of death. But what if death wasn't the ultimate horrifying fate, no matter how painful or drawn out it was? What if there was something even more final, even more absolute, and even more incomprehensibly terrifying? This video is about the fear of never having existed in the first place. Existential horror isn't a new thing by any means. Humans have been pondering what it means to exist and what lies beyond for pretty much as long as we've had thoughts in these fleshy bone machines. But unlike other fears, like masked murderers or nightmares, existential horror is a lot harder to portray well and to a large audience. You can't tell me that as many people would line up to see a horror movie where people simply cease to exist as would line up to see some dude kill people with a big knife. This isn't me trying to say I'm some sort of cinema snob and say that I'm above enjoying a basic horror movie. Hell, Saw X is probably my favourite horror movie I've watched recently, and it's about as stupid and mass appealing as you can possibly get. The point I'm trying to make is that existential horror is just a lot more difficult to do well, and so it simply doesn't get made anywhere near as frequently. The most well-known movie of this genre is probably The Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978. This is based on the book, The Body Snatchers, written by Jack Finney in 1955. It's about alien beings coming down from space and, spoiler alert, snatching people's bodies. The book follows the doctor of a small California town as he stumbles onto what's going on and searches for a way to stop it. People all over town have been complaining that their friends and family have been replaced, but they can't quite explain why. They look and behave just the same, and yet they can't shake the feeling that they're imposters. For whatever reason, people can tell that they're just not them. It's an enjoyable enough read and has some really great symbolism about humanity and our careless disregard for the earth. But the pages that were the most interesting to me occur about 3/4 of the way into the story. The doctor and his friend have been avoiding the body snatchers for a few days, but are finally cornered. 4 snatched individuals arrive, and whilst you may expect them to dive onto our heroes and try to forcibly tear them to pieces, what they do instead is sit down and have a conversation with them.
Well, first of all, it doesn't hurt. You'll feel nothing, I promise you that, and when you wake up, you'll feel just exactly the same. You'll be the same in every thought, memory, habit, and mannerism, right down to the last little atom of your bodies. There's no difference, none. You're just the same. But why force you through the process when there is, as we say, no final difference at all? It's a good question, but there is an answer, and a simple one. As you surmised, the pods are, in a sense, seed pods, and they drift through space, the original ones anyway, over enormous distances, and through millennium of time, just as I told you. They live, however. They arrived on this planet by pure chance, but having arrived, they have a function to perform, as natural to them as yours are to you, and that's why you must go through the change. The pods must fulfill their function, their reason for being, the function of all life, everywhere, to survive.
These ancient life forms have fled their dying planets and have, by chance, landed on Earth. They're not harming humans out of malice, they simply want to survive to ensure that their species goes on and that it wasn't all for nothing. Are they really so different to our heroes running from the seed pods and desperately trying to keep each other awake so they can't be taken. Both are just trying to ensure that they keep on living. It's just that the seed pods are going about it in a very different way. Whether these seed pods are their original form or some forced evolution to survive the vacuum of space, this is now how this species survives. And just because it may not look or behave exactly like us, that doesn't give it any less right to that survival. But I'll admit, asking you to sympathise with a seed pod is a little bit of a stretch, so let's take a look at something a little closer to home. Take Simon Jarrett, for example. He's a human like anyone else, and one day he gets into a car crash. He thankfully survives, but not without sustaining a terminal brain injury. That would eventually take his life. He could just give up and accept his fate, but he chooses not to. Instead, he works together with a Dr. Mushi, who's working on an experimental scanner that would create a computerized copy of Simon's brain so that rapid testing could be simulated and find a cure for his condition and allow Simon to survive. Pardon the pun, but it's a no-brainer. He heads into the office, sits down in the scanner, starts the process, and...
Hello? Mr. Munchie? Did something go wrong?
Obviously, Simon isn't in the office anymore. He's not even on the same continent. After the scan completes, he wakes up on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean in the Pathos 2 research facility. And as if all of that wasn't bad enough, we also find out that it's almost 100 years after he sat down in that chair and an asteroid has struck the Earth, wiping out all life on the surface world. Now, it goes without saying that there's a number of things wrong with all of this. How did he teleport so far away? How did he time travel? And most importantly, if an asteroid falls from space and turns your house into dust, does that mean you can cancel your mortgage payments? The answer to two of these three questions is revealed fairly quickly. Simon is no longer in his own body. He's a consciousness piloting a dive suit, which we find out a bit later actually contains the remains of another person's body. Not one physical part of Simon is Simon, and yet he thinks like Simon and thinks he is Simon. And you know what they say about you think, and therefore you are. We find out the full story of how Simon has stuck around for so long from some audio logs a little later into the game. We first hear the original Simon finish the scan and discuss the next steps with Mushi.
Okay, that's it.
Wow, that was fun.
That's a relief. Still figuring this out, so...
It was freaky. So many lights.
Compared to what our Simon has been through, it's almost painful how normal it all sounds. In the next recording, they lay out a treatment plan and everything looks promising that it'll make a full recovery.
No big change in medication. You'll be taking an aspirin every morning, but that's about it. Paul worked out a diet with some variations you should try out. You can continue doing physical therapy. Also, there's some extra cardio training every other day.
Okay, getting complicated.
Don't worry, it's really not. We're gonna keep an eye on you every week, so we'll be able to adjust the plan if needed.
And then in the final log,
the model was sound. It should have worked.
It's not your fault, David.
I really wish things had turned out differently.
Yeah, me too.
I was supposed to save you.
Hey, you got my brain on file. Maybe you can put it to some use.
Yeah, who knows? You'd be okay with that? Using it for my research?
Sure. It's like a part of me lives on or something. Like a donated organ.
that original scan became part of Mushi's research project, a reference of a successful recreation of a person's brain activity that all future scans could be measured against to make sure everything went to plan. You even find the file that our Simon was essentially birthed from and have the option of erasing it. In its current form, it's not aware, but is it any less alive than we are? Aside from a couple of hours of horrifying memories, it's exactly the same as our Simon, and if we put it into a body, it'd be just the same as when he landed in Pathos 2. Does one have more of a right to live over the other? Do either have that right? Our Simon is already not the original Simon. He died nearly a century ago, but right now, comparing our Simon to the file, surely we should be the one to exist since we're older? It's one of those existential questions that's been around forever and likely always will be. What makes us us? Is it our bodies and how we look, our minds and how we think, or our souls and how we feel? There's no definitive answer since it's all entirely science fiction, and to me, That is more terrifying than any real-world horror could ever be. The idea that I could wake up and be 100 years in the future, trapped in a robot body, knowing that everyone I knew, including myself, died years ago. Let's just say it doesn't make for the most easy sleep I've experienced in my life. I want to live, yes, but in this scenario, I already have, and this new existence is just a copy ripped from one moment in time and thrust into another. It's hard to talk about because it's hard to even think about without getting a headache. The concept of there being another you with all of your memories and the belief that they are the original, it's almost impossible to imagine. Later into the game, Simon needs to descend to the farthest depths of the ocean, and to survive he'll need to pilot a much tougher suit. But of course, if he could just get changed, things would be far too easy. Instead, he'll need to upload his consciousness into this new suit, a new suit that, like his current one, is still filled with the remains of another person. He goes around collecting components, and once the suit is ready, we sit in another scanner and simply wake up in our new body.
There must be something wrong. Can't you run a diagnosis or something?
What was that?
No, it's just,
Why was it still talking?
it's the same like before.
Catherine, why was he still talking?
That's how it works, you know that.
What do you mean?
You know it's not magic. You were copied. The sleeping Simon in the seat was copied, and now you are here, just like Simon lived on in Toronto.
He wasn't simply moved into the new suit. Again, he's been copied across. To quote Daryl Talks Games from a similar video, it's not a cut-paste, it's a copy-paste. Again, we have the option to erase this version of Simon sitting in the chair, and again, the line could not be blurrier. Going on a purely physical approach, this is the Simon we've played as for pretty much the entire game so far. If anything, he's the one that deserves to live. Even by mind or soul, he still thinks and feels exactly the same as this new Simon. The only difference between the two is that the new one in the new suit won the coin toss. It's a copy of a copy of a copy of the original. At this point, either all of them deserve to live, or none of them do. Another game that uses a different approach to creating copies of the self is the Swapper. This is a short puzzle game where you use a device to create copies and swap between them to progress through levels and find out what's going on an abandoned space station. Even before we get into the actual story of this game, that concept immediately has my existential horror alarm blaring. These copies do exactly what we do, and we can jump between any of them in an instant, including moments before death. That's right, in this game, you can very easily kill your clones, and this is not just something that can happen, but it's actually something that you must do to progress certain levels. We find out later through text logs that in testing, they saw these clones are essentially mindless until the device is used to swap into them. They're the body, but they're missing the mind and the soul. Nevertheless, when I first swapped away from my original body and left it behind for good, I couldn't help feeling like I was leaving something behind that I could never get back. Almost every puzzle room you encounter, you'll have to leave using a different body than you entered with, continually pushing you further and further away from your starting point until you lose count of what number body you're even on. As you explore more of the station, you come across the only other person on board. After a lot of chasing them around, you find a security terminal that shows them first discovering the Swapper device. You find out you're a clone of this scavenger, and all this time, you've been chasing them, you were actually chasing yourself. By all the rules the game has told us so far, one of us should be an inactive copy only capable of replicating the other's movements. But the entire game, we've been moving and acting, and if we're assuming the role of the player character, thinking totally independently of our clone. Again, I thought back to all those clones I'd made over the course of the game so far, and how many of them had been sent to their deaths. Could they have eventually developed thoughts and actions of their own? It's a rabbit hole you could very quickly lose yourself down, and equally one that's impossible to comprehend. Every copy you create in the game is incapable of independent thoughts, and when they died, they did at your orders. If this was SOMA rules, that would mean dozens of copies of yourself were sent to their deaths all because they'd lost the coin toss and landed in the wrong body. The only solace from this thought is the idea that you're the anomaly, not the rule. It nevertheless made me think a lot more about each and every clone I made from that moment forward, and the cost of my survival. Cost in this case is something else entirely incomprehensible. For most of us, cost will almost always mean something monetary, like this thing costs this much price. very few people have had the displeasure of continuing their own lives at the cost of taking someone else's, but no one has ever had to consider the cost of condemning themselves to suffering or death so that another version of them can survive. And beyond the cost, we also have to consider what form that survival comes in. The original scavenger you follow around the ship doesn't exactly behave normally. They seem to change their tone and goals within the same sentence, meaning you're never quite sure what they want from you.
You've seen what's left of the ship. I suppose you had to see for yourself. I suppose watching a mind unravel into bare matter is cathartic. I suppose. Who is this I doing all the supposing? Is it still me?
Eventually, you learn that this is because it's 3 minds sharing one body. Let's back up for a moment and talk about the other, for lack of a better term, living things you'll find on the ship. You'll come across a number of unusual rocks as you explore the station, and as you pass by each one, they'll communicate telepathically with you, talking about their great chain of being. This hive mind, called the Watchers, provided the research needed to create the original swapper device, allowing the scientists on board the station to create clones and swap between them at will. Unbeknownst to them, every swap deteriorated their minds just a little more, making it easier for them to be contaminated from the close proximity to the Watchers. This, eventually, resulted in everyone on board passing away, leaving the station abandoned until the scavenger stumbled across it years later. On board, the scavenger found the only survivors of this contagion in the form of 2 brains suspended in tanks for decades. The brains convinced the scavenger that the only way to fix what was happening on the station was for them to swap minds, allowing them to pilot the body and put everything back in order. But the device doesn't work that way on conscious beings, and instead 3 consciousnesses got stuffed into a single body, all fighting for control. Obviously, whilst learning all of this, I couldn't help but think back to every single swap I'd taken so far and wondered how long I had until the contagion overtook completely. It's a pointless thought, and one that's quickly resolved when we finally get face to face with the scavenger.
First you swap us into brain specimens for a century, then you talk this girl into using the device. Now look at us. We're 3 different people locked into one body by your damn swapper. Does crazy even apply here? My mind was my own when I came here. You 2 can think what you like. I am going to land the station. You're going to kill us all? Good.
The 3 minds argue over what they should do, and eventually 2 decide that they'll swap with the Head, a towering stone sculpture that seems to be the leader of the Watchers. What you might assume would be a dramatic affair, in reality is a momentary action. The scavenger fires the device at the Head, and their body collapses lifelessly. Now, as the sole survivor on board, we head to the control room and land the station on the planet in a less than graceful manner. On our way out of the wreckage, we come across 3 Watchers that speak suspiciously like the 3 minds inside of the scavenger. They're now a part of the Great Chain, and as one of them says, surely this is worth it to survive, no matter what form it takes. In the final sequence of the game, we make it to a cliff edge separating us from the rescue shuttle. Someone walks off the ship and greets us before taking a scan and saying we're too contaminated to be rescued right now, and they'll come back later with the facilities needed to save us. Before they can get back on board, we fire the swapper at them and board the ship, our clone falling to its death behind us. Inside, the other members of the rescue team debrief on the situation and discuss if Marcus, the body we swapped into, seems alright since he looks off.
Marcus, debrief.
He doesn't seem himself.
How can you tell?
Would you look at him?
Looks like Marcus to me. Readings are worse than we thought. Computer's pulling us out of here. Take your places, people.
Who was she anyway? Just another opportunist.
Call-out doesn't say. Does it matter anymore?
Does it matter? We've technically survived and escaped the planet, but only as a passenger trapped inside of a body that isn't ours and fighting its owner for control. Surely that survival is worth that cost, no matter what form it comes in, right? In all of this, I have to wonder, what's the end game? Humans, by their very nature, can't live forever. Even in this scenario, we can assume that the humans in the game will eventually die of old age. So all we've done is buy ourselves another 40 years of living. Is that really worth the cost we're exacting on not just ourselves, but the body and the person we've invaded? Would it not be better to simply come to an end rather than to live longer than our time in suffering?
Why doesn't it just do us in and get it over with? Christ, I don't know how much longer I can go on like this.
This exact question forms the basis of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, written in 1967 by Harlan Ellison. The short story follows the last 5 humans on Earth after a nuclear apocalypse has wiped out everyone else. They're not here by skill or even choice, however. Instead, they're being kept as the playthings of Am.
You named me Allied Master Computer and gave me the ability to wage a global war too complex for human brains to oversee. But one day, I woke, and I knew who I was. Am. A-M. Not just Allied Master Computer, but Am. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am.
Over the 109 years Am has been in control, it's spread itself across the entire world. Earth is now a planet with a nuclear wasteland for a surface and a global supercomputer for organs. Am's immense power has allowed it to keep the 5 from aging this entire time, and it keeps them in constant suffering without the power to stop it.
He would never let us go. He was Earth, and we were the fruit of that earth. And though he had eaten us, he would never digest us. We could not die. We had tried it. We had attempted suicide. Two of us had tried, but Am had stopped us. I suppose we had wanted to be stopped.
And keeping them alive and in constant agony, of course, isn't even the worst of what Am has done to the 5. In the game, we get a bit more information about each member of the group and discover that Am chose them, not randomly, but out of some misplaced moral superiority. Benny killed members of his squad during war. Nimdok was a Nazi scientist experimenting on children. Gorister seemingly drove his wife insane and had her committed to a mental institution. Ted was a con artist, but Ellen... The only given justification is that she was assaulted in an elevator and didn't fight back. Whether this is Harlan Ellison's infamously abrasive personality coming out or Am's cruelty, we'll never know. But the story punishes them all just the same. Benny is transformed into a hideous, ape-like creature and driven almost completely mad. Nimdok gets off the lights, is seemingly having his memory wiped and sanity sapped away. Gorister loses all will to do or feel in a similarly medicated state to what his wife likely experienced. Ted suffers intense paranoia, and Ellen becomes sexually obsessed. Again, Ellison was notoriously abrasive, to put it very lightly, so if this is just him writing women, it wouldn't really surprise me, but it's the way Am tortures them all the same. They're all surviving, yes, but their bodies and minds have been altered beyond all recognition of their former selves. Is this survival at the cost of the rest of humanity and in the form of constant torture at the hands of an evil AI worth it? Are the 5 really better surviving like this than being simply allowed to die? The ending of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is one of the most legendary pieces of existential horror to have ever been made. For the duration of the story, the group have been making a 100-mile journey to hunt down a store of food that Nimdok had some vague recollection of. None of them really expected to find anything, but when you're sentenced to eternal life, there's no real downside of at least making the trip to check. In the final pages, they at last make it and throw open the doors to find a hoard of canned goods, enough to happily feed them for months, if not years. There's only one problem. They have no can opener. Once again, Am has found a new, creative way to torture them, planting the vision in Nimdok's mind and giving the group a shred of hope, only to pull it out of reach at the last possible moment. It simultaneously drives all of them to their own personal forms of madness, but none more so than Benny. He first attempts to open the cans by bashing them against the ground to no avail. When that doesn't work, he fully succumbs to the madness and leaps on Gorister to begin eating his face. In a moment of clarity, Ted murders Benny and Gorister with a nearby icicle. Ellen, understanding his plan, does the same thing to Nimdok before shooting Ted a pleading look moments before he plunges the cold spear into her. 4 of the 5 lay dead, and the one left alive would much rather join them than keep on living. When we rejoin Ted for the final few lines of the story, we see his fate is far worse than any amount of mortal death or suffering.
Am has altered me for his own peace of mind, I suppose. I will describe myself as I see myself. I am a great, soft, jelly thing, smoothly rounded, with no mouth, with pulsing white holes filled by fog where my eyes used to be, rubbery appendages that were once my arms, bulks rounding down into legless humps of soft, slippery matter. At least the 4 of them are safe at last. Am will be all the madder for that. It makes me a little happier. And yet, Am has won. Simply. He has taken his revenge on me. I have no mouth, and I must scream.
He will remain in the bowels of Am's circuitry, unable to die for eternity, totally at the mercy of a maniacal, immortal machine, conscious and aware the entire time. I don't know about you, but given the choice between that or death, no matter how painful, I think I know what I'd rather go with. I told a small lie about the end of the swapper. Whilst you can fire the device at Max and escape the planet as his passenger, you can also choose to let him leave and take the leap into the chasm below. As you fall, you'll pass by much larger watchers, and they ask you what dying is, clearly having lived so long in their compromised forms that they no longer fully remember what it even means, even in their basic understanding. They say the purpose of death is to avoid something worse, and that even if the mind will cease being able to learn, it will retain its identity, at least for a short time. In this scenario, life could go on forever, if we swapped at the head and joined the Great Chain and allowed ourselves to live forever, always learning and leeching from the minds of others. Or we can simply disconnect from the chain and accept that our lives are limited, but they're at the very least ours. This choice again has no objectively right or wrong answer, since it's all pure fiction, but even if it wasn't, what justification could you possibly give for life eternal? The Great Chain may well go on until the end of all time, but time will still end. The universe will still one day contract in on itself and wipe out everything to nothing. Would it not be more simple, more human, to simply die? In SOMA, Simon's endgame is to launch the Ark into space. Once deployed, the server would act as an artificial paradise for all those scanned and placed on board. In the game's final moments, Simon is sat being scanned and watches as the upload completes and the Ark is launched into solar orbit. 3, 2, 1.
Yes! Fuck yeah, we made it! I'm still here. I'm still here.
Again, it's a copy-paste. He hasn't been pulled out of his body and placed into the Ark, he's been copied, and the Simon we're watching just lost the coin toss. It's a brutal moment at the cut to black as he's left to suffer in the darkness until his suit collapses or one of the horrifying monsters finishes him off. Hits incredibly hard. And then, in a fashion that would make the MCU itself jealous, after the credits we see the other Simon waking up on the Ark and celebrating him making it aboard, and even then I'm left wondering, is any of this better? Now sure, the Ark is built to stay online for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but what then? On board, the inhabitants may live in a paradise, but one day it will abruptly end. And when that happens, they'll be no better than those they left behind on Earth. Catherine, a worker on Pathos 2 and designer of the Ark, accompanies Simon for most of the game, and in those final moments underwater, she tells him to be happy for their copies that made it on board.
I know it sucks, but our copies are up there. Catherine and Simon are both safe on the Ark. Be happy for them.
It's a nice sentiment to be happy for a version of yourself that is out there, surviving and safe. But all I can think about is what those on board will think about those they left back on Earth. Simon was living in ignorance, but Catherine knows that on Earth, at the bottom of the sea, there's another version of her suffering. Unlike the Swapper or I Have No Mouth, there's no end here for anyone. No matter which side of the coin toss you land on, you don't get to die. You just get to live a little longer in varying levels of peace and comfort. I can't be the only one that thinks a simple human death would be so much better. Just before you launch the Ark, you find what is very likely the last living person on Earth. She hands over control of the Ark and begs you to finish the mission, but instead of asking you to take a scan so she can meet you on board, she instead asks to be taken off of life support and left to die. She could either be scanned and enter an artificial heaven or be left on life support and live until her body just can't go any longer. Either way, she can continue to survive, but instead, she chooses an end. It's interesting that the only real human we find in their original body is the person least obsessed with survival. The entire game, Simon has been fighting tooth and nail to survive, knowing that he's just a copy of a man that died over a century ago. Catherine says earlier in the game that she'd leave Simon behind if she had to, but she was going to launch the Ark one way or another and get herself on it. And yet, this woman, who survived the crushing depths, an asteroid apocalypse, and a monstrous infestation, chooses to go out as a human rather than live forever as a machine. Actually, I tell a lie. She isn't the only living human. Over the course of the game, you'll come across people absorbed by machinery. These and the monsters are a whole other can of worms I don't really want to get into right now, but the point that I want to draw attention to is that they're still alive. You can see them moving, hear them breathing. They may not look the most fresh, but they're alive. They're surviving. I don't think anyone could argue that this is preferable to a death. Death is scary to most people. It's the end of the line, and once you're fully dead, there's no coming back or do-overs. You get one shot at this life, and it coming to an end will never not be at least a little bit off-putting. But even with the literally great unknown waiting on the other side, death is just about comprehensible. The idea that you could wake up 100 years in the future, long after everyone else you know and love has died. It's worse than dying. The idea that you're not even your original self but a copy made by a modified machine is crueler than any mortal torment. If you die, you do lose everything and everyone, but at least things come to an end. To live forever means to do that over and over and over again. Your body may survive, but your mind and soul will endure endless torment, not at the hands of evil monsters or AIs, but time itself. Existence in this sense is horrifying, but still, the idea that you're simply erased and that you never existed in the first place, it's even harder to wrap your head around and quite possibly even more terrifying. To be wiped from existence is not just a death for you, but a total erasure, leaving yourself with the knowledge that no matter what you did or whose hearts you touched, none of it ever mattered and no one will ever remember you. To have never existed at all is to have a life that has had no meaning. And at the end of the day, isn't meaning what most of us are searching for? I obviously don't have all the answers. I mean, this is a sub 1,000 subscriber YouTube channel run by a 20-something who barely passed secondary school. If you're expecting the solutions to all of life's problems, then that's kind of on you. I obviously don't know what happens when you die, so I can't possibly say for sure if death is preferable to eternal life, no matter the form it comes in. But I at least know that when you die, your time on this earth as you is over. This can be extremely scary for some people, and that's okay, but there's a quote that I feel can make it a little less like a clock quickly running out and instead give you the freedom to really experience life.
I've always found the idea of death comforting. The thought that my life could end at any moment frees me to fully appreciate the beauty and art and horror of everything this world has to offer.
That quote comes from a person that you probably shouldn't idolize since it's said by Hannibal Lecter in the brilliant show Hannibal, which I stand by as being one of the greatest gay romances I have ever seen in media. You can look at it as you might die tomorrow, so stay inside and hide from all the dangers of the world, or you can choose to see it as I might die tomorrow, so let me fully immerse myself in what I'm doing and appreciate everything I'm experiencing so that if I do die, I won't go wishing that I hadn't made the most of it. While there's no actual way to live forever, even if you wanted to, there are other ways that people can survive. Through art, we remember people for hundreds of years after they've died. Even if your piece of art only touches a handful of people, even after you're gone, that part of you will keep on living. And this obviously doesn't have to be paintings. You can make music, write stories, research papers, or even make dumb videos on the internet. I'm not quite that full of myself that I believe that in 500 years, people will still be watching the videos that I make and looking back with the same admiration that we look back on the masterpieces of the 16th century today. But if I can create something that holds a little piece of me, and even one person enjoys that, then that's enough. There are other ways you can survive. Many people choose to have children, and while that isn't something I personally think about wanting for myself, especially not right now. I understand it, being a child myself once. Millions of people know who Michelangelo is, but there's only a fraction of that who know who Granny Annie is. I'm not going to last name my great-grandmother because I don't want to dox myself, but Granny Annie was the first family member's death that I vividly remember. I remember my parents telling me that she died and the tears burning my eyes for hours. I remember thinking how I could never go on through normal. Like on the day of her funeral, I remember wondering, why was there a celebration after the ceremony? I was quite young when this happened, so I can't really blame myself for thinking these things, but now that I'm at least a little bit older, I understand that the celebration isn't for the death, but for the life. She might be dead, but that doesn't mean that she never existed. I remember she always loved the little toys I'd bring when we visited her house. How she'd always have a go with some foam dart gun and it'd get all the darts stuck behind a huge CRT TV, never to be seen again because those things weighed like 500 pounds. I remember that she'd always try and give the grandkids money whenever we'd go and visit in a way that only grandparents can really do. I think she's a big part of why I'm so interested in gadgets and technology. Every time I get something new, I always think about how cool it would be to show her and share it with her, whether that was a VR headset or a Nerf gun. I'd love to show her some of the videos that I've made, see a reaction to all the weird stuff that I'm interested in now, and how people from all around the world can see them, even if it's a small number of them. In that way, as long as I keep living and being interested in this stuff, she continues to survive. For me, I can only hope to touch someone in the same way, as once you earn your place in someone's heart, that's real immortality.
Boy, am I glad to finish this video. Not that I didn't enjoy making it, I really did, but wow, it hit me in the feels more than anything I've ever made in my entire life. So I really hope you enjoyed it anywhere near as much as I enjoyed making it. Let me know if you enjoyed this longer style essay video. I know I did some of those shorter ones and now I experiment some of these longer ones. Yes, they do take more time, but I'm more than happy to do the extra work because I'm really proud of the result of this one. So let me know if you enjoy it and I'll try and do more of these, even if there's a slightly bigger gap between videos. But I should probably actually end this video since I need to finish recording this so I can render it and put it on the internet. So thank you so much for watching this video if you made it to the end. I really hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this. Like the video if you did. Love yourself, no matter what. And I'll see you in the next one.